like a very cool sounding like intro video. So welcome upstairs. Look around you guys. This is pretty nice, right? This is actually really nice. They did a really good job with this, and it's such a blessing that we just get to use this for free. Let's just start with a prayer. God, we know you are good, you are holy, you are love, you are perfect, and you are our God. So we're here to worship you, and we acknowledge and we thank you for your providence and the things you have given us and your guidance to us, especially as we reflect on this new space that we have. And I pray that as we try to faithfully follow your will, that you bless us so that we can be a blessing to others. And in this time, just get rid of any distractions, soften our hearts, and open our ears so that we can hear what you want us to hear. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. So a few weeks ago, I had friends visiting me from Ottawa, and I was hosting them. And as their host, I wanted to give them the full Calgary experience. The only problem is I don't know what the full Calgary experience is. When people come, I'm like actually grasping at straws to figure out where to take them. But then this time around, I'm like, okay, it's meats. Calgary's known for meat, Alberta beef. And so one of the nights, we were all the way up north in Balzac, finishing up some volleyball. And then I decided to take them to a barbecue joint in Airdrie for their late night happy hour. So that's what we did. We got up to the restaurant, and no one greeted us at the door. And so we just found our own seats. We looked at the menu. We decided what we wanted. No one came to take our order. And so we waited for a long while. And finally, a waitress came out, and she said to us, hey, like one of our cooks left early, and so our kitchen closed early. And yeah, so we don't have food, but if you want to stay, you can hang out. And we're like, aw, okay. So we were super disappointed. We left with no destination to go to other than home. And so I was trying to just rack my brain. What is a Calgary experience that's not downtown, because that's really far away? And bam, brilliant idea came to mind. Señor's Pizza. Okay, that is a staple Calgary experience, I think. So from Airdrie, to get down to Señor's, you have to take the Deerfoot Highway. But the issue is, coming from the north, there's no ramp getting off Beddington, which is the exit you need to take to Señor's. So what you have to do is you have to go down one extra exit and circle up back, right? And it's like, is it worth it? Señor's, yes, it's worth it. So that's what we did. We were circling up, and we're about to take the ramp. The ramp is closed for construction. And it's just like, no, like another disappointment. And so the only way to Señor's now is to go make this huge 12-minute loop back to Señor's. And it's like, at that rate, we just gave up. It wasn't worth it. We went to McDonald's, we got fries and ice cream. While we were eating our ice cream, I was just honest with my guests. Okay, I'm like, guys, realistically, this feeling of disappointment and nowhere to go to eat at night, this is the full Calgary experience. Sometimes life is like this, okay? It feels like we're stuck on this huge detour, and sometimes we're unsure of where we're headed, and it feels like no matter what path we take, there's like this underlying tone of disappointment and uncertainty. And just to work off what Sam was saying, maybe even worse, we feel like we are on the right path and we're numbing ourselves, but the worst thing is that we might not be, right? But the Bible tells us that we don't have to live this way, that there is a path that we can confidently take to get to a right and satisfying place in life. And that's what we're dealing with today. Our question today is, how do we get to the right place in life? And the answers that we'll be exploring is, 1, give credit to God, and 2, obey God promptly. We get this from our story of Jacob and his journey to get to the right place in life, which for him is home. But before we dive into our actual passage, there's a lot of background story that we need to know. So most of this is taken from Genesis 30 and 31. I'm going to summarize the story of Jacob and Laban. So Laban is Jacob's father-in-law, but at the same time, he's Jacob's boss. Why? Because in order to marry Laban's 2 daughters, as we're 2, Jacob had to work for 14 years for Laban, taking care of his sheep and his goats for no wage. So you can imagine, by the time the 14 years were up, he's like excited to go. He's out of there. But Laban knew something. Laban knew that Jacob was blessed by God. And because of that, everything that Jacob did prospered. And because of that, Laban was becoming rich off of Jacob. And so he didn't want Jacob to go. So he was willing to do anything to have Jacob stay. He was begging Jacob to stay. He was going to give anything. And then Jacob negotiates. He's like, okay, you know what? I'll stay if you give me all of your defective sheep and goats. And so the defective sheep and goats were the ones that were dark, striped, speckled, and spotted. And those were like the least valuable sheep. So obviously, Laban's like, yeah, duh. A deal was made. However, before Jacob got any of those animals, what Laban did was he took those animals, he gave it to his sons instead, so that when Jacob came to claim those animals, Laban was like, what animals? I don't have any. But now Jacob's stuck in this deal, right? He was stuck in a deal where he got nothing again. Well, Jacob's always been resourceful. He was always doing whatever he could to get whatever he wanted, and this time was no different. As Jacob was watching over Laban's, light-colored, solid, pure-colored sheep and goats, he experimented with breeding. While the animals were mating, what he did was he made them look at branches that were striped, speckled, and spotted. And it sounds weird, but it worked, okay? When the animals gave birth, they actually had sheep and goats that were striped, speckled, and spotted. And the Bible describes the result of Jacob's work like this. It says, in this way, the man grew exceedingly prosperous and came to own huge flocks and female and male servants and camels and donkeys. Nice, right? It's like a happily ever after story for Jacob. That is until Laban and his sons came to accuse him of stealing. And so now, even though Jacob kept his side of the deal despite Laban cheating him, he was hated by those who were around him. He was no longer in the place that he wanted to be. And so he had a family meeting. He gathered up his wives and his kids and whatever, and he was trying to convince them that they needed to leave this place right away. And he did convince them by telling them a dream that he had from God. And it's from this story we'll learn how to get to the right place in life. We'll be looking at Jacob's dream today. So the first point is that we need to give credit to God. We need to acknowledge God's providence. Just a bit of a story beforehand. Every time my family comes together and there's like a real Vietnamese celebration, there always seems to be durian there. Okay, and if you don't know what durian is, think back about medieval times. There's that mace, and at the end there's like a spiky ball. So imagine that spiky ball is now more spiky, it's bigger, and it's a fruit. And the moment you open it, it literally smells like garbage, okay? I love that garbage, it's delicious. But what always blew my mind was who is the first person to eat durian and what were they thinking? Like, just imagine with me, okay? Imagine the first person to see durian and they're like, ooh, spiky. And then they touch it and they're like, owie, so sharp. And then, so sharp. And then instead of like running away, what they did instead was they opened it. And they're like, they take a whiff and they're like, oh, ew, he's so stinky. And instead of throwing it on the ground and burning it like anyone else would do, they grab that mushy, warm, brain-looking thing, liver thing, and they put it in their mouth. And they eat it. And it's like, what are you thinking? What was going through your mind at the time? But we're lucky because for durian, it worked out. It's delicious. But what about the thousands of poisonous mushrooms and berries and plants? Like, how do we know nowadays not to touch and eat those? Especially for those who came before, Google search. And the only explanation is pretty much a bunch of people totally got sick and probably died, so so that we can eat strawberries and raspberries without being scared of dying. We're not eating poisonous berries. And that's a crazy thought, eh? That the everyday things of life that we're used to, that we enjoy, they're not accessible to us because they're only accessible to us because some unknown person or group of people out there at some point in time pretty much sacrificed their lives for it. And here we are, or at least I am, complaining about how fat we're getting, but we don't know how good we have it. We don't know how good we have it. We are the beneficiaries of those who came before us. And knowing that actually helps us be more appreciative of what we have and more grateful. And it's actually the same thing in our relationship with God. If we give credit where credit is due, we will be better able to appreciate God and to live on the right track. In our story with Jacob, as he was convincing his wives that they should leave Laban and go back to his homeland, he shared this dream with them. It's from Genesis 31, verses 10 to 12. In breeding season, I once had a dream in which I looked up and saw that the male goats mating with the flock were streaked, speckled, and spotted. The angel of God said to me in the dream, "Jacob," and I answered, "Here I am." And he said, "Look up and see that all the male goats mating with the flock are streaked, speckled, or spotted, for I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you." Here's what's happening. Jacob's just been royally screwed by Laban, and so he does that weird thing with Laban's solid, pure-colored animals where he made them look at, branches, spotted and speckled branches while they were mating. And that's actually a superstition back in the day that believed that newborn animals will look like the things that their parents were looking at when they were mating. So by that logic, the parents of zebras were just horses looking at, piano keys while they were doing it. And for us, we know that genetics doesn't work this way, right? Jacob thought that he deserved the credit for his success because of these experiments, but in this dream, we actually get the real answer. That even though the parents of these solid-colored animals, or parents of these animals were solid-colored, it was God that supernaturally made its offsprings striped, speckled, and spotted. It wasn't Jacob. But now that his life is just falling apart and he sees how weak and helpless he is, he knows that it wasn't because of his power, but it was because of God's power. And while this realization seems really small and subtle, I would say this is one of the biggest transformation points of Jacob's life. Because his whole life, Jacob's been doing whatever he could to get whatever he wanted. He was using his power to plan and to scheme. But for the first time ever, he realized that everything is not in his hands, it's in God's hands. So what does this change of mindset, what does this change of worldview do for us? Or do for Jacob? For Jacob, at least, knowing God has been helping him in the background actually helps Jacob to trust God more and to follow him fully. And it's the same for us. This is the mindset that the Bible asks us to adopt. That while we know that obviously we're responsible for our own actions, and that we are to make the best of our resources for the mission of God, we're asked to understand that at the same time, God is the one in control of every single detail of our lives, and that we are to give credit to Him. If we just reflect on the Lord's Prayer for a second, there's a part right in the middle there. It says, "Give us today our daily bread." Jesus is teaching us to ask God for our daily bread. And so who is actually praying this, sitting at home, doing nothing, waiting for bread to fall from the sky? No one. If they are, they're extinct, right? But why is Jesus teaching us this then? Why is he teaching us to ask God for our daily bread? It's because it's true. Okay, it's true. All good things come from God, and the Bible is telling us to position ourselves in a way where we understand that provision comes from God so that we can trust Him. And in that trust, there's a peace knowing that He is good and He's in control. There's gratitude knowing all the things that he's done for us. There's hope knowing all the things that he's promised to us. And finally, there's satisfaction knowing that if we follow his way, that we are right where we are supposed to be. So one way to build this mindset is to always be thanking God, especially for things that you've never thanked him for before, big or small, and that will rightly credit God, and at the same time, that will give us the ability to trust him in the hard times and to obey him when we really don't feel like obeying him. That leads us right to our second point. We get to the right place in life by obeying God promptly. Promptly means right away. In the last part of Jacob's dream, verse 13, God says this. Okay, he says, I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now, leave this land at once and go back to your native land. Now, what's really interesting about this verse here, this particular verse, is that when Jacob, first brings up his dream, he says that he had it during breeding season, okay? Breeding season. So that means that before he became successful, before Laban and his family hated him, before all that, God said this to him. God said, hey, remember our covenant, remember your vow and commitment to me, and out of that, now leave this land at once and go back to your native land. What does that mean? That means that Jacob completely ignored God's command, right? And the only reason he's obeying God now is because the life that he chose to live is now crashing and burning, and God's plan is plan B. The disasters in Jacob's life could have been avoided many times, actually, if he were to promptly obey God's command. I would even argue that delayed obedience is not obedience at all. I have an uncle, and he's silly and he's funny. He's always making the most inappropriate jokes, and so automatically he's the best uncle. But I remember the one time that he was actually serious with me. Okay, he sat me down. I was 12, so I don't know why he was telling me this. But he was sharing with me his struggles of always being late. And he was sharing how, because of procrastination, because of always delaying things, he hurt many of his friendships. And he was dating his soon-to-be wife, and his relationship was on the ropes because she lived in a different city, and he was always missing his flights to go see her. And he said this to me. He said, whatever you do in life, make it a point to be on time. Why? Because that shows people that you care about their time, that you value them, and that you don't take them for granted. Because let's say you're always delayed, you're always late, or you're even flaking on them. What does that tell them? Well, it shows them that they're not very high on your priority list. And whether you admit that or not, it's probably true. And so out of all the things my uncle's ever said to me, for some reason, that stuck, or probably stuck because it made so much sense. When we delay things, when we procrastinate, when we are late, what we're showing to others, and what we're showing to ourselves even, whether it's intentional or not, is that whatever we're pushing back, whatever that is, it's not important to us, or it's not a priority. And so let's bring that logic into our relationship with God. When we know what God asks of us, and we know that it's good, but we don't do it, or we push it back, it shows that we actually don't prioritize God's word. Sure, maybe to us it's important, but not as important as blank, whatever that is. Sleep, money, school, friends. And from there, it's hard to make the argument that even though you don't care about a person's word or will or desire, you still care for the person. So when we talk about obeying promptly, what's our goal? What's our goal with this obedience? Is it to live life however we want, and then once we're kind of waiting for God to say something, and once he says it, we do it right away, we finish it, and then we go back to living life, and it's doing that over and over again? No, our goal is to live as Jesus did. And I truly believe that at all times, Jesus was living in full obedience to God. At all times, he was following the way of love. He was committed at all times to the mission of God. So whether he was sleeping, whether he was hanging out with his friends, praying by himself, sharing the gospel, dealing with demons, or wrestling with his emotions, all of that was done in love for God and love for others. and therefore he was living completely in obedience to God 24/7, and that's our goal. I don't think it's attainable, but that is our goal. To obey promptly and to not stop obeying. Jacob didn't obey right away. He delayed his obedience, and as a result, it led him to some very bad circumstances with his in-laws. And also, it probably made him miss out on a bunch of opportunities to do good for the mission of God. And so from Jacob's mistake, this is what we learn. We learn that we are to do what is right before it is convenient, right? Love God, love neighbor now, not at your earliest convenience. And as we try to commit to this following of his love, ask yourself, what does it require of you now, today? For me, as a naturally lazy and procrastinative person, what it requires of me is that if I have an excellent idea or a loving thought, instead of saying, I'll get to that, I'll try to do it right away. So if there's a need to meet with somebody, I'll grab my phone right away, I'll message them and be like, hey, what day are you free, what time, and then I'll prepare for that meeting to the best of my ability, and that's how I best love them, and that's how I best obey God promptly. And if it's something that's huge and daunting, and you've been leaving it to the side because it's just so scary, let's say a huge stack of work, or you actually have to invest in a bunch of people, what you can do is commit to doing a bit at a time, so that you're not tackling this impossibly huge problem, but rather something where you can track progress and see rewards. And for me, that's how I best obey God promptly. The story of Jacob shows his long detour to finally get to the right place in life, which for him is his homeland. So to summarize what we learned from Jacob, for us to get to the right place in life, we give credit to God. Because when we understand that God is behind the scenes working and taking care of us, it not only gives us peace, but it gives us trust to follow Him fully. One practice to get into this mindset is to always be thanking Him and to give credit to Him. 2, we obey God promptly. Delayed obedience is not what God is asking of us. So if there is an excellent idea or a loving thought that comes to mind, make it happen. Make an appointment, set an alarm, do what you need to do to make it happen now. And if we do these things, we can be confident that we'll get to the right place in life.